Mr. Garrett staying. I know, he's one of our witnesses. We can count him even though he's not sitting down. Subcommittee will come to order. Now that we have 8 members, we can proceed on the 2 markups. After the conclusion of this brief business meeting, we will proceed immediately to our scheduled hearing on Saudi Arabia's troubling educational curriculum. Pursuant to notice, we will meet to consider 2 bipartisan measures this afternoon. As members were notified yesterday, it is the intention of the chair to consider today's business en bloc so that we can proceed promptly to our hearing. So without objection, we'll proceed en bloc. All members may have 5 days to insert remarks into the record, and without objection, the following measures and amendments will be considered. H.R. 425, the FTO Passport Revocation Act of 2017, the Poe Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 425. H.R. 1196, the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act of 2017, and the Zeldin Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1196. Before turning to our ranking member, I now recognize myself to speak on today's 2 bills. The 2 bipartisan bills today before us, H.R. 425 and 1196, address dangerous issues, terrorist and foreign fighter travel. H. 425, the FTO Passport Revocation Act that Ranking Member Keating and myself introduced, will authorize the Secretary of State to revoke passports of those Americans who have aided and abetted terrorist organizations. This will help prevent American citizens with evil designs to exploit the privilege of a U.S. passport to support the murderous cause of terrorism. Mr. Zeldin's important bill, H.R. 1196, the Counterterrorism and Screening Assistance Act of 2017, will increase U.S. engagement with partner nations and increase the capacity to screen and prevent foreign fighter travel. We have all seen the devastating results of lax security and screenings, including the most recently when the perpetrator of the Manchester bombing returned from Libya, an ISIS hotspot, days before the attack. These 2 measures will go a long way to securing our homeland and protecting our allies around the world. I encourage all members to vote in favor of these 2 important pieces of legislation. I will now yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the ranking member, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Chairman Poe, and thank you for bringing forward these 2 important pieces of legislation. H.R. 425, the FTO Passport Revocation Act, of which I'm proud to join you as a co-sponsor, is straightforward. This bill would authorize the Secretary of State to refuse to issue a passport to or revoke the passport of an individual who's affiliated with aiding, assisting, or abetting an organization the Secretary has designated as a foreign terrorist organization, with certain exceptions, including emergency circumstances, humanitarian reasons, and law enforcement purposes. I appreciate your leadership on this issue and your attention to streamlining the changes between this bill and the House-passed version from last Congress. H.R. 1196, the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act, introduced by our colleague Mr. Zeldin, is a product of the House Homeland Security Committee's Foreign Fighters Task Force. As many of us know, the task force completed and published a review of foreign fighter travel and threats in 2016. This bill, a version of which passed the House under suspension last year, seeks to improve U.S. programs to strengthen foreign governments' efforts to disrupt terrorist and foreign fighter travel. I'm particularly appreciative of your willingness to continue to work with me and members of the subcommittee to further improve this legislation. It's important that we do not penalize our foreign partners for their efforts to promote peace at home, and that we ensure any foreign assistance authorized to be suspended under this bill is not detrimental to our security concerns. I look forward to working with you to this end, and thank you for your commitment. I yield back.
Do any other members wish to seek recognition? Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the subcommittee's consideration of my legislation today. Sadly, we have seen terrorist attacks in Europe over the last 3 years, which have killed hundreds of people and were largely carried out by European nationals. Some of the perpetrators of these attacks traveled to train and fight in Syria and returned to Europe through Greece and Turkey. Although some of the attackers were already known to local authorities, they were able to move across borders without detection. and in some cases use fraudulent passports. Given the high number of foreign fighters returning from ISIS strongholds in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere, there is a recognized need for improved border security and information sharing between governments. The lack of a United States government-wide risk-based approach increases the odds that systematic security gaps abroad may persist, and that United States response efforts will not be maximized in order to close these gaps. Failure to effectively coordinate capacity-building activities also results in greater risk of overlap, waste, and unnecessary duplication between the United States and international programs. To help solve this problem, I introduced H.R. 1196, the Counterterrorism Screening and Assistance Act of 2017. This effort is very similar to H.R. 4314 from the 114th Congress, which passed the House by a 371-2 vote on March 21st, 2016. H.R. 1196 mandates a report card which will assess foreign governments' respective border security efforts. My bill would also require the President to submit a plan to Congress which would catalog ongoing initiatives and programs with the goal of enhancing the partner country capacities of interdicting terrorist activities and foreign fighter travel. The plan will also identify areas for improvement and steps that will be taken to address any concerns. H.R. 1196 would also require the Department of State and Department of Homeland Security to accelerate the delivery of certain border security systems, prioritizing delivery to countries of greatest concern and risk for foreign fighter or terrorist travel. When possible, the U.S. will attempt to collect reimbursement for transferred equipment, and all equipment transfers will comply with existing regulations related to the export of sensitive technologies. The Department of State and Department of Homeland Security would also be required to submit an annual report to Congress detailing how countries are meeting the minimum border security standards established within the Act. The report will assess partner country efforts over the previous 12 months and identify areas for improvement. Further, the bill would put in place a monitoring system that would screen for infectious diseases to contain and prevent any potential outbreaks, which will help quarantine viruses by authorizing the Secretary of Homeland Security to provide the necessary equipment and supplies to mitigate the risk or threat of infectious diseases such as Zika. Finally, H.R. 1196 would allow the Secretary of State, in consultation with the Secretary of Homeland Security, to suspend all non-humanitarian, non-trade related foreign assistance to any country deemed not to meet the minimum border security standards set forth in the bill. Senators Marco Rubio and Chris Coons have introduced a companion bill in the Senate, which is Senate Bill 942. I look forward to working with my colleagues in the House and our friends in the Senate to pass and send this bill to the President. I'd like to thank you, Chairman, and the Ranking Member for your hard work and efforts in considering this legislation today, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from New York. Does any other member wish to be recognized? The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Judge Ted Poe, for your leadership. I am grateful to support the bills in today's markup. I always appreciate being in the presence of Chairman Frank Wolf of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Recently, we've seen a rise in the terrorist threats coming from returned foreign fighters and homegrown terrorists as the Islamic State uses their extensive digital network to promote violent, extreme messaging in an effort to recruit in Western nations, including in the United States. I was grateful to introduce an amendment to this year's National Defense Authorization Act last week that would counter the propaganda and fundraising efforts that are used to recruit Americans to join terrorist groups as foreign fighters. We should also have penalties for American citizens who join the fight against freedom, democracy, and human dignity, including the revocation or denial of a United States passport. We also need to establish minimum border security standards to combat international travel by foreign terrorist fighters. The bills before the subcommittee today do just that by working in a comprehensive manner to address both the causes of foreign terrorist fighters and their movement so that we can protect American families. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, the question occurs on the items mentioned in blanc. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The measures are considered in blanc are agreed to. Without objection, the measures considered in blanc will be ordered favorably to the full committee as amended. The staff has decided or directed to make technical and conforming changes. This concludes our markup. The subcommittee stands adjourned on the markup. The subcommittee will now come to order. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. The chair will ask that the witnesses excuse me, come forward and sit in your designated position.